Hello, I am introducing my projective test of creativity. This assessment in particular should be completed in conjunction with several other tests. And this is because part of the procedure really depends on it. So the clinician should begin by explaining to the client that they're going to be engaging in a series of tests today. They should disclose which test they're going to be going through, but they should very much so leave the projective creativity test out of that list. And this is because they are going to go on to say that in this clinician's experience, people can become very anxious and stressed out when undergoing testing. And the clinician should disclose that they like to start with a game in order to reduce some of the tension and to calm the client's nerves if they're feeling a little anxious. The practitioner then goes on stating that the goal is to come up with as many connections between the two cards as possible. The more imaginative, the better. It's important to tell the client that they're not going to be timed. It's also very important to let them know that they can pick a new set of cards anytime that they really want to. Once the testing procedure has been completely explained and the client's questions sufficiently answered, the clinician will actually start to covertly time the client, and the timing will begin when the client turns over the first two cards. So to facilitate this test, the client has exactly 30 minutes to go through and list as many connections as they can. So as you can see, some cards are more closely linked. We have these two, which both depict birds on them. So this would be an example of cards that are more closely linked. And an example of a common and less creative response to these two cards would be something to the effect of, these are both birds. A mid-range creative response would be something to the effect of, these are both predators. And a less common and more creative response would be that both of these things start with vowels. When you are facilitating this test, it's important to note the testing manual because for each of those levels, there's a certain frequency that we get those answers. So with a common response, it's just, it's almost always people say something that's similar, at least, to that common answer. A mid-range response would be about 50% of the time people will say that, and then a more creative response would be 15% of the time people say something like that. The scoring should be conducted essentially like by writing down exactly what the client says and then afterwards going to the testing manual. But for common responses, the client gets 1 point. For mid-range responses, the client gets 2 points. And for creative responses, the client gets 3 points. If the client comes up with a wholly unique response, we always leave the option that the client could come up with something that nobody's ever said before. They get 4 points for that. So we are going to go on and see a less linked series of cards, just as another set. So as you can see, this one depicts a rainbow and then a stream. An example of a less creative response would be that both images are naturally occurring in the environment, and a more creative response would be something to the effect of, both of these require rain for their creation. Because changes in culture and society can change the response frequency, the scoring for card pairs and the testing manual must be renormed every few years. So every exactly 3 years, we're going to be renorming the test manual because changes in popular culture or stuff like that can change the frequency in which people see connections between certain cards. So in order to determine how creative a person is, the clinician will go to the testing manual. They will add up all of the points that a person earned during the half hour that they were coming up with these connections, and they will determine into which range a person falls. And these ranges were created by taking people who were either not very creative, kind of a mid-range of creativity, or highly creative, giving them a test called the Wallach-Kogan Creative Battery, and finding out what they scored, as in like the, low range creativity, mid-range creativity, and high range creativity. And then they were given the projective creativity test, and it was determined how many points that they scored. And these are what created those 3 different levels that a person can test into. So we are able to predict with a degree of certainty the validity of an individual's creativity by giving this test. All right, thanks. I hope you enjoyed my video.